What's up everybody, Brian Earhart here from Team Discraft, and welcome to another episode of Level Up. Today we're going to be talking about something that I think all of us can always be improving upon, the mental game. Let's get into it. The mental game is the topic that I've easily gotten the most requests to talk about, and to be honest, it's a very vulnerable topic for me to talk about. When I first started playing the game as a young kid, it started to make me feel a lot of really strong emotions, with anger probably being the most prevalent of them. As I got older and as I played this game nearly every day for years, I had a realization in my early 20s. Why is the game that makes me so angry also the game that I can't stop thinking about? As I thought about that concept, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole studying why it makes me feel that way. And over the years, I've read so many good books and gotten wisdom from so many different people. And now, as a teacher myself, I've been able to impart some of this wisdom on people that I've worked with, and I am excited to talk about it with you today. First, I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of my most impactful lessons I've learned over the years. And next, we're going to dive into some questions submitted by players all over the country of some mental game challenges they've faced. The number one life lesson that I've learned playing disc golf over the years is that self-talk is way more important than we realize. There's a really good line from the book Golf is Not a Game of Perfect by Dr. Bob Rotella that says, "People tend to become what they see themselves to be." And on the disc golf course, I see a lot of players who see themselves to be a lot lower than they actually are. In the book, it talks about us being children and in elementary school and how good behavior is really not rewarded, it's expected, and bad behavior is punished. And I think a lot of people on the disc golf course tend to do that to themselves. They only remember the bad shots, the shots that don't go where you want them to go, the misfires, the missed putts, and those are the shots that they beat themselves up for and insult themselves over. In the book Zen Golf by Dr. Joseph Parent, there's a term he uses called detached observation, and that's something that he recommends trying to do when you're reacting to shots that don't go your way. Most of us like to label the shots that we throw as some variation of good or bad. And when we start using subjective labeling on our shots, we stop sending our body good messages to make corrections the next time. Practicing this concept of detached observation and labeling your disc golf game objectively rather than subjectively will help you remove the emotion from your self-talk and see the game much more consistently. So in other words, the putt you threw off the cage from 20 feet was not abysmal, it was simply too low. The shot that you sprayed off into the woods to the left was not the worst shot of your life or terrible, it was simply an early release. The next big life lesson that I've learned over the years that applies directly to disc golf comes straight from the book Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. There's a section of the book where he talks about how as children we're taught how to stop, drop, and roll when our clothes light on fire. And because we know how to handle that situation when it arises, we don't carry the fear of that happening with us in our daily lives. I see so many disc golfers do exactly that and carry all sorts of anxieties with them throughout their entire round of disc golf. They're worried about hitting the first tree, they're worried about missing that short putt, they're worried about hitting the cage and rolling down the hill. But when I ask them what they're supposed to do after something like that happens, they all know what to do. They walk up to their lie, they mark their disc, and they make another shot. You are more prepared for these situations than you realize. And because of that, there's nothing to be afraid of. When you get rid of those little fears that you carry with you, you're going to be way more free to play up to your potential. The last mental game tip that I can give that's helped me a ton over the years is to simply assume that all of your card mates are going to throw every shot in the fairway and put every putt in the basket. There's nothing worse than getting caught off guard by a shot your opponent makes that makes you start to compare your own round to theirs. If you simply assume they're going to make every shot, eventually you'll be desensitized to when something extravagant happens, and it's much easier to stay in your own lane and play your own game. Getting into this habit will lessen the pain of being big putted because you already expected the disc to go in the basket. With that, you can continue to keep plugging away at your round. And at the end of the day, the less you compare yourself to the rest of your card mates, the better. Okay, so a quick recap. I know we've covered a lot of concepts here. Number one, acceptance. Accept anything that happens on the disc golf course because you are capable of handling anything that does happen out there. Number two, be honest with yourself when something that might feel unlucky happens. Was it truly unlucky, or was there something you could do to change that? And number three, observation rather than criticism. Speak about your game factually and don't always feel like you have to label it with some sort of opinion. So now we're gonna jump into some player submitted questions. Let's jump into one here. Okay, bogeying hole 1 in a tournament. Starting off the day bad, sometimes it's hard to reset. This was actually covered directly in the book, Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And they say, to play consistently, you have to think consistently. So before your rounds, make sure you're telling yourself what your mindset's going to be. If you're gonna play aggressive the whole round, tell yourself that out loud, speak it into existence, and stick to that. If you're the kind of player who gets scared of bogeying the first hole, tell yourself before the round, I'm gonna accept anything that happens to me during the round, no matter how chaotic it might be, and get into the habit of sticking to that game plan throughout your entire rounds. Obviously, this is easier said than done, but this is the key to making sure that bogeying the first hole doesn't derail you for the rest of the round. Okay, here's another one. I just threw a really bad shot and hit first tree. How do I recover from that? This is something that I struggled with when I started playing disc golf, and I started learning how to throw hard. The harder you hit trees, the more you're gonna kick deep into the woods. I found myself very often trying to be a superhero from the woods, and my mindset was always having to save something. If we just take the lie of the disc in the woods and we treat it like a tee shot on a hole, we're gonna think a little bit differently about it. We're always analyzing tee shots, but I never quite see players analyzing the percentages as much when they're in the woods. So if you see that lie as the tee pad of a new hole, how would you play that hole? No. Okay, here's another one. Oh, here's a doozy. I just shot a fantastic first round, but I always seem to melt down in the second round. How do I handle the imposter syndrome that comes with shooting such a good first round? This is a very, very good one. So, first and foremost, imposter syndrome implies that you don't believe that you belong in the position that you're in. If you shoot your first 1,000 rated round and you're on the lead card of a tournament, congratulations, your potential is showing. That's it. There's nothing more you need to take away from that other than you shot a great first round. I think a lot of people get way too excited and they forget that classic Kobe Bryant quote, the job's not done yet. You still have more rounds to go in the tournament. So after you shoot that amazing first round, your next job is to handle that break between the end of the first round and the beginning of the second round. The goal is to keep the same mindset, the same intensity throughout the entire tournament, so you don't get to rest easy after the first round. You can be proud of how you played, but your goal is to try to take that same energy into the second round and not feel like you're riding this up and down roller coaster of emotion. Okay, here's another really good one. I put my heart and soul into this game and practice so often, but I never seem to get the results that I want. I like to call this transactional training. And this is the belief that just because you show up to the practice field more than other people, you deserve the win more than they do. Everyone knows that one disc golfer, though, that only has a few discs, doesn't practice at all, and can still whoop anybody at their home course. Disc golf is not black and white. You can't just put time in and get results out. So I think there's a sense of entitlement that kind of builds up, not necessarily bad entitlement, where you're asking for the manager of your favorite coffee shop, but more so just thinking that you deserve victory because you put the work in. Practice is good for grooving that self-conscious stroke and grooving that muscle memory, but the moment we show up to the disc golf course, our expectations need to be down to zero, and we need to understand that we don't deserve anything more than anybody else we show up to play against. So that's probably the biggest fallacy that I see from people, but once we realize practice is great, and practice does give us an advantage, but we can't let it change the way we think about ourselves on the course. When the vibe on my card is good, I tend to play great. However, when I have negative card mates, I melt down and play terrible. First and foremost, Playing with really negative people who are outwardly negative is awful. You have to just accept that. There's no way around it. The one thing I will say is there are a lot of people that play disc golf tournaments that should be called for courtesy violations because of the way that they're behaving. And I say this from the standpoint of being someone who's called courtesy violations on people 3 separate occasions for way unsportsmanlike conduct. And actually, I want to quickly read the PDGA rule. Section 812 says, a player must not engage in distracting or unsportsmanlike actions such as shouting, cursing, striking, kicking, or throwing part, course, or player equipment, moving or talking while another player is throwing, or advancing beyond the away player. Now, you don't need to be super strict with these things, but if you're playing with somebody who's way crossing the line, sometimes a simple courtesy violation is enough for that person to wake up and clean up their act because they don't want to get stroked on the next morning. Next, if someone is teetering that line and they're just getting underneath your skin, I've played with players like this before as well, earbuds and headphones are still legal. As much as some people don't agree with them, if you need to keep an emergency pair in your disc golf bag, it's really not a bad option to zone out and start playing your game, kind of living in your own world a little bit, listening to music or whatever you like listening to. Okay. All right, this might be actually the most prevalent one I see in the wild. I hate spit outs. The moment I have one, I can never come back mentally from it. First and foremost, I understand. I've had some spit outs that just devastated me on the course. That's another one of those situations that hurts no matter what. However, you can label it as unfortunate. That's okay. But feeling like a victim of some terrible fate when this happens to you will never help you beat the rest of the field. Victim mentality, especially when you get so close to the basket and come up short, is so detrimental to your game. So in this situation, if a disc goes to the basket, hits the chains, pops off the pole, be as honest with yourself as you possibly can. Was the putt just a hair too hard? Was it a hair too high? Was it a little bit too hyzer? Is the basket old? There are so many factors that play into getting a spit out that it's very rare for one to be truly unfortunate. Happens all the time in bowling. As a bowler myself, I've thrown tons of balls that looked absolutely perfect, hit the head pin, and I was left with a 7-10 or even a 7-10 split. It happens in sports, and spit outs are inevitable. Everyone in the field has them happen to them, and you just have to take it as part of the game and move forward. And going back to what we talked about in the Bob Rotella book, acceptance and having a consistent mindset chosen before each round that you play is so important for grooving your mental game and preventing that mental anguish that you might feel after a nasty spit out during your round. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. I really hoped you gained something from this. Let us know in the comments down below what's been the biggest life lesson you've learned from the game of disc golf. And also let us know any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. We will see you next time.